sit with me? Will you sit with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. Will you sit with me? Will you sit with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. Will you sing with me? Will you sing with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. Will you sing with me? Will you sing with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. Darling, take my hand. Darling, take my hand just for a little while. For a little while. I know there's a world we're fighting for. There's a world we're fighting for. Darling, take my hand. Darling, take my hand just for a little while. I know there's a world we're fighting for. Will you pray with me? Will you pray with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. Will you pray with me? Will you pray with me? Pray with me, sing with me, sit with me. There's a world we're fighting for. There's a world we're fighting for. Will you sit with me? Will you sit with me just for a little while? I know there's a world we're fighting for. There's a world we're fighting for. There's a world we're hoping for.
Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. My name is Peggy Sherman and I'm your service associate today. And today we're so happy to welcome back to our pulpit Matt Meyer. Matt is a lifelong Unitarian Universalist with a long background as a musician and worship leader for UU congregations. He lives in Boston but travels as an itinerant worship leader. Matt serves as the Director of Operations and Community Life for Sanctuary Boston, a contemporary UU worship community with rock and music and engaging worship. Matt's children's story, Desmond Gets Free, was recently published as a book by Skinner House. You can check out links in the chat and we'll provide them later in the service to find more about Matt and how to get his book. Welcome, Matt.
Our call to celebration this morning comes from Mary Oliver and her poem At the River Clarion. I don't know who God is exactly, but I'll tell you this. I was sitting at the river named Clarion on a water-splashed stone, and all afternoon I listened to the voices of the river talking. Whenever the water struck a stone, it had something to say, and the water itself, and even the mosses trailing under the water. And slowly, very slowly, it became clear to me what they were saying. Said the river, I am a part of holiness. And I too, said the stone. And I too, whispered the moss beneath the water. I'd been to the river before a few times. Don't blame the river that nothing happened quickly. You don't hear such voices in an hour or a day. You don't hear them at all if selfhood has stuffed your ears. And it's difficult to hear anything anyway through all the traffic, the ambition. I don't know the origins of this next song, but it seems to have been inspired by this poem of Mary Oliver. It says, put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Let's see if we can get the drum in the picture here. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. 'Cause the sound of the river as it moves across the stones is the same sound as the blood in your body as it moves across your bones. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen. Put your roots down, put your feet on the ground. You can hear what she says if you listen.
Please join in the chalice lighting words shown on this next screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we'll sing Magnificence by Peter McKenna, led by Matt Meyer.
This song has 4 different parts. The first goes like this, and I invite you to sing along with whatever part feels best for you, or just go ahead and make up your own. Just because we can't hear each other far away doesn't mean we can't still sing together. And it doesn't mean we can't still breathe together in rhythm. Wash me away so that all that's left is love. Waves are coming in, waves are coming in. Well, thanks for singing along at home. I'd love to share this story with you all called Desmond Gets Free. Now, Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond would wake with the sunrise and spend the whole beautiful day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of that meadow under the beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond awoke to find that it was still dark out. He tried to roll over, get more comfortable, and go back to sleep, but something wasn't right. Desmond could hardly move, and his tail was, well, it was throbbing with pain. Reaching behind him, he felt that there was some sort of huge boulder seemed to have fallen just on his tail in the middle of the meadow. He tried pushing as hard as he could on this giant rock behind him. And he tried tugging on his tail with all of his strength to get loose. And he tried pushing and tugging and pushing and tugging over and over again. So at last he was out of breath. But it was no use. He was stuck. Just then, though, he heard another animal passing through the meadow. He looked over and he saw a giant giraffe walking by. Good news, he thought. "Oh, giraffe," he called out. "It seems that some sort of boulder has fallen just on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could use your powerful legs to nudge it just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." Well, the giraffe laughed at Desmond the way giraffes do. "You silly mouse," it said. "That's no boulder that's fallen on your tail in the middle of the meadow. That is an elephant that's fallen asleep on your tail in the middle of the meadow." "Well, good news," said Desmond. If you could just gently wake him up and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "I don't know about that," said the giraffe. Surely you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this." "Well," said Desmond, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." The giraffe wandered off, leaving Desmond alone again. So he tried shouting with his own voice as loud as he could to wake the giant elephant. But those huge elephant ears were just too far away on the other end of that giant elephant body. He tried again, pushing with all of his strength and tugging with all of his might. And he tried pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing and shouting and shouting and shouting. But it was no use. And when he had just about given up, he saw another animal pass by. This time it was a gazelle. And he called out, "Oh, gazelle, it seems that some giant elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could gently wake him up and ask him to roll over, even just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free." "I don't know about that," said the gazelle. "Surely you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this." The gazelle wandered off, and Desmond said, almost to himself this time, "I do not appreciate your neutrality." Well, one last time, Desmond tried shouting with all of his voice. He tried pushing with all of his strength, tugging with all of his might. And he tried shouting and pushing and tugging and tugging and pushing and shouting over and over again. And when he had just about given up for the last time, he saw another animal pass by through the grass. This time it was another mouse. He called out, and the mouse ran over and introduced himself. "My name is Nelson. What seems to be the problem?" Well, no sooner had Desmond explained the situation than Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body. And he called up to that giant elephant ear on top of that giant elephant head, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. If you could roll over just a few inches in the other direction, he could go free." Well, the elephant heard Nelson's little voice way down on the ground, but those ears on top of that giant elephant head, they were just a bit too far away, and Nelson's voice was just a bit too small. And to be honest, well, the elephant was just a bit too comfortable. He didn't budge. So Nelson ran back to Desmond. He said, "I think I might have an idea. Stay right here." And he ran off, leaving a confused look on Desmond's face. But just when Desmond was starting to get worried again, he saw Nelson emerge through the grass. And this time he wasn't alone. He had found 3 mouse friends, and each of them had found another 3 mouse friends. The whole group of them ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body. And one mouse climbed up on another mouse's shoulders, and another mouse climbed up on hers. And then one by one, they built a whole mouse ladder all the way up the back of that giant elephant head. And at last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his friends one by one. And at last, he stood right at the opening of that giant elephant ear. And he shouted, "Excuse me. It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Roll over just a few inches so he can go free." Well, his voice was just too loud now and too close to ignore. So the elephant let out a low grunt and he rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and his friends climbed back down to the ground, and they met up with Desmond, and the whole group of them spent the rest of that day playing in the meadow together. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who passed away just a month or so ago now, has said, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have already taken sides with the oppressor." He says, if an elephant is standing on the tail of a mouse, the mouse will never appreciate your neutrality. Archbishop Tutu believed in a God who took sides, he said, with the orphan and the widow and with the oppressed always. As Unitarian Universalists, we may or may not share a belief in that God, but we have covenanted to build a world of justice and equity and compassion. And that means imagining and building a world very different from the one we see around us today. And so that means we work together to take sides for justice, to take sides for equity and compassion. And it means that we come together to side with love. May it be so, and may we make it so.
And again, we welcome Matt Meyer to our pulpit. He's a musician and worship leader who has led hundreds of services for UU congregations across the country. And he serves as Director of Operations and Community Life for Sanctuary Boston.
Today's service is about how we find a sense of home, how we create home by hand, how we find stability even amidst the chaos around us. So in that spirit of creating a home by hand, we offer this reading of the wisdom of architects. This reading is called An Abbreviated List of 250 Things an Architect Should Know, written by Michael Sorkin, a professor of architecture at City College of New York.
The feel of cool marble under bare feet.
The modulus of rupture.
The flowering season for azaleas.
How to lay bricks.
Hydrology is destiny.
The color wheel.
What the client wants. What the client thinks it wants. What the client needs. What the client can afford. What the planet can afford.
How the pyramids were built and why.
The pleasures of the suburbs.
The horrors.
The quality of light passing through ice.
The meaninglessness of borders.
The reasons for their tenacity.
The smell of concrete after rain. The angle of the sun at the equinox. The depth of the aquifer beneath you.
How to get lost.
The architectural impact of colonialism on the cities of North Africa.
A distaste for imperialism.
The fire code, the seismic code, the health code.
How to listen closely. Who profits?
What to refuse to do, even for money.
A bit of chemistry and physics.
What makes you happy?
The acoustical properties of trees and shrubs.
Bicycle safety and etiquette.
The acoustic performance of Boston Symphony Hall.
The distance at which you can recognize faces.
Your neighbors.
The capacity of wetlands to attenuate storm surges.
The depths of desire.
The heights of folly. I invite you to take a moment to breathe deep, to find that sense of home in your own body, wherever you are. To breathe deep, feel your feet on the ground, to be present with yourself, maybe for the first time all week long, to be present here together, even at a distance. Let's take some time for shared silence and reflection. you're like me, perhaps you've spent more time than usual at home in the last year or two. What an odd time, for me at least it's been, to spend so much time at home, consistently looking at the same four walls, while the world around me is changing fast, faster than ever. Every day, the headlines are dramatic and unpredictable. And so I have been thinking on what it means to create some sense of stability, even in the eye of this storm, of what it means to find a sense of home, to root ourselves in community, even as the world changes fast, even as we hope to shape the world around us. I've made my home by 3 different rivers. As a child, my extended family spent every summer, sometime at least, at a little house in Minnesota, on the St. Croix River at the border of Minnesota and Wisconsin. We'd always called this cabin of wood and stone the lake house. The river that it's on is wide there, but it's no lake. And I remember that I was a teenager before this discrepancy finally occurred to me. I remember finally as a teenager turning to my mom and saying, "You know that this is a river, right? Why are we calling it a lake house?" And she explained that the geologists tell us that it was actually a lake long ago, thousands of years ago. How funny, though, to call this home a lake house, named for a thing that hasn't been there in 1,000 years, named for something that isn't there now. Learning of the ancient lake beneath the St. Croix River, I felt like my mind grew 3 sizes that day. The world was older than I knew. It was bigger than I knew. And it was somehow more malleable than I could have imagined. Hydrology is destiny, the architects tell us. Hydrology is history also. My great-grandfather had built that home. He hired a team of his brothers-in-law and then enlisted the help of a pile of children in his Catholic family that he put to work. These little kids carrying stones up from the beach, laying the mortar. The electrical wiring behind the walls, in fact, only ever went as high as the smallest kids could reach. I don't recommend this as a safe way to wire your home. For a child like me, though, felt like an impossibly old cabin that may as well have been there since the ancient times when the river was a lake. An ancient house by an ancient river. But something about getting older over the years has left me feeling closer to my great-grandfather rather than farther away. And while my heart is warmed by the longevity of that home, I'm also heartened to think of a time when that home was still only an idea. When big family dinners around the table and fires on the beach were only in my ancestors' imaginings. This is the lesson of rivers, and particularly the waterways where we make our homes and neighborhoods and civilizations. They are constant, and they are constantly changing. History and destiny. I was shocked 2 years ago when the pandemic came and we rearranged everything so quickly. Congregations and corporations and even Congress somehow acted quickly to make changes unlike I'd ever seen before. I'd always been told by my elders that change happens slowly and takes time. But as an activist who has worked for years to try and make the world at least a little different, part of the pain of the great shutdown of 2020 was seeing that lie made visible. Change can happen slowly, but it can happen quickly as well when we agree to create it. The lesson of rivers, the lesson of handmade homes, should remind us to imagine a world different than the one we inherited. Change is possible, and it is inevitable. Things as they are not as they were, and what is not what will be. A sense of home, like the warmth of community, is something we make by hand. Oh, river, I hear you, feel you calling me. Oh, river, who will I be when I reach the sea? I grew up near the city of Chicago, and the city of Chicago grew up at the intersection of Lake Michigan and the Great Chicago River. In the late 1800s, though, as the city was coming into its own in the Industrial Revolution, the city was transformed by the changing times. One side effect, though, was that the Chicago River became incredibly polluted. Before there was a good sewer system, before there was ways of cleaning the sewage and the water, it all ended up in the Chicago River. And the river flowed into Lake Michigan, the source of the city's drinking water. This was a public health disaster, as you can imagine, so much so that Chicago became known as Typhoid Fever City. So the city embarked on this huge project to address this increasingly dire situation, and they called it the Big Ditch. The city dug a canal that reversed the flow of the entire Chicago River, and our river has run backwards ever since. For 130 years now, the river has flowed from Lake Michigan rather than feeding it. And the plan worked. It made for a much cleaner city and much healthier people. Growing up near the Chicago River, I never knew how different it once was, though. I knew, of course, that the tall buildings and the beautiful Chicago skyline were shaped by human hands. But those same hands, the labor of architects and engineers and thousands of everyday workers, shaped the water as well. Things as they are not as they were, and what is not what will be. Just as we back and forth shape the world around us, just as we are shaped by it, the river had shaped the city of Chicago, and then the city in turn shaped the river. You may be wondering, though, as I did, what exactly happened to the waste in the Chicago River once it was suddenly headed in the other direction? Well, you probably won't be surprised to learn that the farmers and other folks who overnight suddenly found themselves downstream of all that waste weren't too happy about it. Farmers in Illinois took the city of Chicago to court, and then the city of St. Louis, the entire city, sued Chicago, and then the entire state of Lake Michigan sued the city. Each one took Chicago to court, one after another after another. How perfectly American to deal with waste by sending it downstream to someone else. The poet Wendell Berry, a farmer with a special way of words, he once summed up the religious traditions of the world in his own environmental way. He said, "Do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you." The wisdom of architects tells us that borders are meaningless. The wisdom of the rivers confirms it. Rivers are conclusive evidence of the meaninglessness of borders. So is pollution. So are viruses, for that matter. Anyone with a 6th grade science education who's learned the basics of the water cycle knows this truth, that we all live upstream from one another, and we all live downstream from each other. Water in all of its forms demonstrates the lie that we are separate. It demonstrates the lie that one people can set policies that don't affect their neighbors, that lines can be drawn in the sand to divide up the interdependent web of all existence. Why is it that so many of the same people who deny climate change also deny the gravity of a global pandemic? It's because they are both evidence against the ideology of rugged individualism. They are both evidence against the myth of our separateness. It turns out that sending sewage west instead of east is no magic. It is not transfiguration. It is only delay. It is sickness afar instead of sickness near. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. Finding my way, 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 finding my way back home. When I left the region of the backwards Chicago River, I came to Boston for college. Now, Boston has been so shaped by the water around it that there was a time when there was only one road to get into the city on dry land. And before it was a street, it was a path that was submerged at high tide. Half a dozen neighborhoods were built up out of the water in the city of Boston. And the Back Bay, the neighborhood where I lived when I first came to the city as a student, was created with some serious dedication to this cause. Trains arrived in the city dumping 3,500 railroad cars of gravel into this bay every day for 50 years to make the neighborhood that I would eventually call home. The city of Boston, like all cities in a way, is made up. The laws and policies and the police, the boundaries and the borders of it, the zoning and transit and parks, and certainly the shorelines were all imagined by people, and they were made by hand. The good and the bad of it. None of it is natural, and none of it was inevitable. These are the three stories of my homes. Along a river that flows over a lake, near the river that flows backwards, and sitting on top of a river of gravel. Last year, 2021, was a year of water, to be sure. My state had our wettest summer in history, while 90% of the West was facing drought at the same time. Our country is drowning, and our country is on fire at the same time. But none of this is natural, and none of it was inevitable. It doesn't have to be like this. The lesson of rivers, the lesson of handmade homes, should remind us to imagine a different world than the one we inherited. Even the things that seem most permanent are constantly in motion. The last 2 years have been a time of seeking stability even amidst constant change. Trying to make sense of home, trying to make a sense of home by hand. The pandemic, like increasing hurricanes and increasing droughts and fires, is a reminder of our interdependence. A reminder that we can't draw made-up lines in the natural world and call them borders and pretend that we don't have an effect on one another. We can't poison the air and the water and overheat the planet and hope that clever engineering will send the problem downstream to someone else. We are bound up together, and we all live downstream. But things as they are not as they were, and what is not what will be. We know that what is obvious today was unimaginable yesterday, and the rivers remind us that change is constant. So, dear ones, let's imagine something beautiful and send it downstream. Let's envision an interconnected world that is loving and just and healthy. Let's imagine a more beautiful home together and make it by hand. Let's imagine more equity and compassion and make it real. Let's imagine a world without borders and make it truth. Let's imagine cities and civilizations that thrive along the rivers and the waterways that bind us in that web. Beloveds, do unto those downstream as you would have those upstream do unto you. May it be so. May we make it so.
Thank you, Matt. An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. Another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution via one of the options shown on this next slide. You can click on the tiny URL link in the chat to contribute, or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose of your gift. And for our offertory music, Matt will give us "Oh River" by Mom Hughes.
Thank you. Finding my way, finding my way, finding my way, finding my way, finding my way when I reach the sea. Take a moment again to breathe deeply, to be present with our own selves, to be present with each other, even across the distance. Spirit of love that is within us and between us, be with us as we are with each other this morning in the all of it, bringing our whole complicated lives, our whole complex stories. Love be with us as we are with each other in the grief and the sorrows, for those lost to COVID, for the burdens that weigh down on our hearts, for the fears and hopes we have for our own holy but fragile bodies. Love be with us as we're with each other in the celebrations, in the joys, in the small glad gifts of our living day to day and week to week, celebrating weddings, new milestones, even amidst this great shutdown, finding ways to gather safely together and celebrate our connections, our families of birth and families of choice. Spirit be with us as we are with each other in the all of it, in the grief and the gratitude, in the sorrows and the celebrations. Love be with us, be within us. Amen. Dear ones, our closing song is More Waters Rising by climate justice activist Sarah Lynch Thomason. Sarah, who wrote this, lives in Appalachia, and I love that this song, like the best music and perhaps like the best faith communities, calls us not to turn away from difficult things, not to ignore the multiple crises of our time, but to look at them directly, to name them honestly, and to move forward to address them together. I invite you all to sing along at home as you get a sense of it. There are more waters rising, this I know, this I know. There are more waters rising, this I know.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Beloveds, let's imagine something more beautiful and send it downstream to each other. Let's envision an interconnected world that is just and loving. Let's imagine a more beautiful home together. Let's imagine more equity and make it by hand. Let's imagine a world without borders and make it real. Let's imagine justice and equity and compassion. do unto those downstream as you would have those do upstream unto you, because we all live downstream and we all live upstream. Dear ones, go in peace, go in love, and go and be blessed as you are a blessing to others.
And our thanks today go to Matt Meyer, our wonderful musician and speaker. Our ushers, Annika Pfluger and Dawn Dana, Sharon Babila and Eric Von Hausen, our pastoral care associates. I'm your service associate. Our welcomer is Barb Manning. Office support comes from Tammy Goddard Hathaway and Patience Pichette. Technical support from Chris Jensen. And our flowers are arranged by Sandy Stone and donated by Don Odell in memory of his son, Matt, born on October 6, 1980, died in January 1999, while a freshman at American University. His promising life ended far too soon. And here's some links to follow Matt and get resources and inspiration and order his wonderful story, Desmond Gets Free, and find out about Sanctuary Boston, which sounds so interesting. We do have some announcements here. As you know by now, next week our multi-platform services begin. Today, the Green Sanctuary team meets at 11:30, and contact Chuck Manning for the Zoom link. Next Saturday, February 26th from 1 to 3, there will be an online workshop centered on the religious education community's anti-racism, anti-oppression, multicultural, and implicit bias work. For more information, you can contact Elizabeth Valdez and watch for the information in the daily emails. And as you know, we're hiring. We're looking for a creative, dynamic part-time music director. So more information is on our website. And the nominating committee is issuing a call for nominations to be elected in May. So you can email Todd Thomas for more information or look on our website.